that's Billy Joel. She's always a woman to me. And this is our ongoing discussion of Wilde aesthetics, consumer aesthetics, commodified art, art that welcomes commodification, being in the world of the market, and doesn't try to escape and go to like the museum or like this coterie art world that doesn't have an attachment or connection to the marketplace, to the world of commerce. And, you know, we are in a multicultural age, a secular age. People like Charles Taylor have called it. You know, there's secular swaths of culture. There's Christian swaths and Jewish and Buddhist and Muslim and different styles of all of the above, different styles of secular thought, spiritual without religion, all these different cultures that are next to each other. And their own little parallel polises. And they have their own values. But there's still a common ground. Is there enough of a common ground? Those who are pessimistic say no, and we're about to have a civil war or various civil wars. I think that's a little bit silly. I think that's not going to happen. And Wilde is going to help us. And let's turn to another writer named T.S. Eliot. And I think I saved this in my PowerPoint. Let's take a look. Okay. Oh, that's a different PowerPoint. Hold on a second. Oh, goodness. It's this one. And so, yeah. So here it is. Sorry for this technical difficulty going on here. Let's go ahead and look at the... how do I start this thing? Anyway, we can just look at it as it is. No, this thing's going to work. Come on. Slideshow. So, Myth and Meaning, that's our ongoing thing. And we want to go here to T.S. Eliot. Eliot says in his notes towards a definition of culture, I then try to expose the essential relation of culture to religion and to make clear the limitations of the word relation as an expression of this relation. The first important assertion is that no culture has appeared or developed except together with a religion. According to the point of view of the observer, the culture will appear to be the product of the religion, or the religion the product of the culture. So what is Eliot saying here? Eliot was a Christian at this point in his life. That no culture has developed without a religion. You know, the Greek religion gives birth to Greek culture. The ancient Egyptian religion gives birth to Egyptian culture. The Jewish religion, so forth. Roman, medieval Christian, medieval Muslim. Like, to get those cultures going, to have great works of art and literature and philosophy, they needed a religion. Until the modern world, in which now you have no single religion. We have a multicultural situation. And Eliot was looking at that world and he said, yeah, this isn't going to work. He didn't believe that Western liberal thought, by which I mean like the multicultural reality of the West today, Western political liberalism, not liberal as in liberal versus conservative, but just the tradition of this Western democracy. Eliot looked at it and he thought, this isn't going to work because we've got to compete with the communists in the Soviet Union, and they're like on fire, and they've got strong ideas, strong gods that people can really rally around. Or the fascists in Germany and in Italy, they've got strong gods too that people can really rally around. Whereas there's no strong gods, and he was living in England at the time, the UK. Like, we've just got, freedom and political liberalism, and kind of weak gods and commerce and like kind of tawdry commercialized art. And so he was kind of wondering, maybe we need to go into one of these directions, either communism or fascism, or a Christian culture again. He wrote an essay about that, the idea of a Christian society, perhaps thinking that would be the way that the UK would have to go. It didn't really happen. But yeah, so I think Eliot was fundamentally wrong, because Western liberalism has survived and it's continuing. Is it thriving? It's working. I mean, it's working better than almost anything else. And can this commodified, commercialized, multicultural situation give birth to great culture? And Wilde was kind of saying yes. And he was kind of one of the few people who were saying that. And if you look at the academy today, the universities, like a lot of people in my department, in the English department or in the history departments, they're basically different versions of Marxism. They're saying we need social justice, we need a strong state to kind of hold back all these exploitative rich people and make things equal and bring back equity. Too much commercialization is bad. Wilde saying, no, let's dive headlong into that commercialization. And so let's see if I can tease out this set of ideas in these plays that I'm talking about. And I know most of you haven't read these plays. An Ideal Husband, A Woman of No Importance. There's a great film version of An Ideal Husband with, I'm drawing a blank on the actors, Rupert Everett and Jeremy Northam and Kate Blanchett. Anyway, really, really good actors, really good director. Oliver Parker is the director. And so when you get a chance, take a look at those films. But let me just say a few things about these well-dressed philosophers. So Wilde is presenting us with a philosophy in these plays it's not spelled out in a kind of systematic way. So I'm trying to make it more systematic for us. And to present it, he has these kind of icons of his art in what? In the woman of fashion, in the man of fashion, in the well-dressed philosopher. That's what he's calling it. He calls Lord Goring in An Ideal Husband the first well-dressed philosopher in the history of thought. And that's a serious statement, that being well-dressed, being fashionable, being connected to the commercial market-driven culture of the world is crucial to his philosophy. That they're both artists and artworks. Okay, so what are the things that these well-dressed philosophers present, and what's the positive vision that they're giving to this modern multicultural Western liberalism and market-driven culture? Three things. One, stylized utterance. So they don't speak plainly. They speak in a stylized utterance. It's always slanted. It's always a little bit given like this kind of musical panache, I'll explain. Second thing, they are themselves symbols of the culture. Like an architectural work, like a building, is a kind of symbol of a culture, whether that's like the White House or the Eiffel Tower. Like, that is symbolic. Well, a person also stands as a symbol of a culture. Like, we even use the word sex symbol. Like, you know, Marilyn Monroe. Like, this is what he's drawing upon, the symbolic aspect of these public persons. That's the second thing. Third thing, through these, he's going to delve into the unconscious, the irrational aspect, which is where consumerism comes in again. Like, what we buy, what we wear, how we spend our money entertaining ourselves is crucial to our identities. And this is where we're tapping into our unconscious. Okay, so icon versus idol. So let me make a short excursus on what's the difference between an icon and an idol. And this is a distinction drawn by a French philosopher named Jean-Luc Marion. And I'm not an expert on him, but I'm getting this from somebody else. But it's applicable here because you have this public image. Think about an icon, like a religious icon of Jesus or of Mary or of a saint, and how it is. It's a symbolic. It has the symbolic resonance of that culture. So when an icon represents an image, let's say of a person or an animal, it respects that nature. It respects the patterns embedded in that object, in that person, in that thing. Sometimes it's a building, sometimes it's an animal, sometimes it's a human. And it doesn't try to dominate it. Whereas an idol is when the human has total control over the object and dominates it and has this sense, like the way our technology totally dominates our environment. Like, I think that's a good way of thinking about it. Like, we have incredibly accelerating power technologically. Technology keeps getting more and more powerful, and it seems of an infinite type of power. We have total control over the environment. We don't need to be cold when it's cold. We don't need to be hot. We're getting to the point where we can shape even weather. If we go too far, we're going to end up destroying our weather, but that's another story. But we have this technology that gives us this control. We think about our wetware, like our bodies, like as a kind of negative thing. Like, we'd be better off being robots, and couldn't we just like upload our consciousness to a robot, and then we would be essentially gods. We would be immortal. This is the temptation of the Tower of Babel in the Bible, and people like Tolkien would write a lot about this. And so when we're dealing with these commodified works of art, this consumer aesthetics, I'm pushing, and I think Wilde is pushing us towards the icon. So that's the work of art that respects what's there, respects the patterns and the behaviors in that natural person, in that natural object, whereas a destructive type of consumerism treats it as an idol and wants absolute total control over it for the desires of the human being. And so we need to respect the persons and the world, ultimately. We'll get back to that. Okay, so I mentioned those three things. The first one was stylized utterance, stylized speaking. Not speaking straight, speaking in a kind of slanted way, an artistically distorted way. And Wilde has this thought of what is art. It's the cracked looking glass. It's not like an accurate mirror. It's a distorted mirror. It's like twisting things. So it's like, whoa, and like as in a cracked mirror. And that's good. That's what art should be, says Wilde. It should be stylized. And I've had this conversation before, but it's such a crucial conversation. I'm going to show it again here in my PowerPoint. If I can find it here, I should do my desktop. Excuse me. And so, in An Ideal Husband, Sir Robert is he's going to eventually be blackmailed by Mrs. Cheveley. So Sir Robert is this up and coming politician in the UK. He's working in the Foreign Office. He's got a really high job. He's on track to potentially become the Prime Minister. And so he's on a good track professionally as a career. He's a Sir, and he's here with Mrs. Cheveley, who's this mysterious woman who's come from abroad. She's been living in Austria, and she kind of has these resonances of like having read German thought, and like, it's even hinted at like kind of Nietzschean type thought. I don't think Wilde was reading Nietzsche, but anyway, the ideas were out there, especially in Germany, and so she is voicing these kind of Nietzschean ideas, and she is talking about women and the well-dressed woman as the modern philosopher. I was talking about the well-dressed philosopher, especially the woman of fashion. So here's this conversation with Sir Robert, and she is saying like, hey, I don't like posing. And Sir Robert says, you prefer to be natural. And Mrs. Cheveley says, sometimes, but it is such a very difficult pose to keep up. Sir Robert, what would those modern psychological novelists of whom we hear so much say to such a theory as that? Mrs. Cheveley, the strength of women comes from the fact that psychology cannot explain us. Men can be analyzed, women merely adored. Sir Robert, you think science cannot grapple with the problem of women? Mrs. Cheveley, science can never grapple with the irrational. That is why it has no future before it in this world. Sir Robert, and women represent the irrational? Mrs. Cheveley, well-dressed women do. And this is Mrs. Cheveley adducing the Dionysian side of culture. Like we've talked about right hemisphere, left hemisphere. Right hemisphere is the more seeing patterns, seeing overarching big picture things, like the Dionysian aspect of culture. The Apollonian culture is more like the left hemisphere, like logic, certainties, really drilled down facts. And Mrs. Cheveley says, no, I'm gonna work on this irrational side of things. This is where real power lies. Coming up with the stories that drive culture, coming up with the images and tapping into the unconscious. That's where I'm going to do my artistic creation and philosophical work. And so this is Mrs. Cheveley. So here, first of all, she's speaking in an ever stylized manner, shocking. She's always saying something that's paradoxical, that shocks us, that shocks Sir Robert, and gets him to think and shocks him into thought. So this is the beginning of philosophy. Saying, being natural is a difficult pose. Like, what? Isn't being natural like not posing? But wait a minute. Okay, there is an aspect of posing as natural. Or women cannot be analyzed, only adored. This is that idea that women are subject to be wondered at, to be adored. This is getting at what we love, what not looking at it as a detached observer, but being totally passionately involved in the image we are beholding. This is the right hemisphere. This is the irrational. This is getting into the unconscious, the mythic patterns. Thinking about the Oedipus complex or other complexes that Freud would have analyzed. This is before Freud, but anyway, Wilde was working in a similar vein. And this is the philosophy of the superficial, not like the substantial, but the accidental, the stuff that's on the outside, the ornament, the distortion, the mere appearance as Nietzsche would call it. This is getting at a phenomenology of consumer culture, something that, in a way, I don't know that anyone other philosophers have delved into this. Not in this way, anyway. The way Wilde is through his characters. Maybe Baudrillard a little bit with his simulacra, but not as in depth as Wilde is doing here. And so we need to go back to Wilde for this reason. I think I have an allergy. Anyway, gosh. And so, in what way is Mrs. Cheveley and Lord Goring and these other characters, these well-dressed philosophers, in what way are they symbols? And what does that mean? Because, I've kind of talked about a distinction between a kind of materialistic, empiricist thinking versus symbolic thinking. And Wilde is into symbolic thinking. And even talking about himself in his Letter De Profundis, which he wrote from prison, he describes himself as standing in symbolic relation to the art and culture of my age. Standing in symbolic relation. So, like, the White House is this building standing in symbolic relation to its culture. Wilde himself standing, and it's true. You can really see it. He's an icon. He has a symbolic valence, especially for his time, which is the 1890s. But even today, he is an icon. Stands as in a symbolic relation. Or thinking about the well-dressed women, the women of fashion, who was, sometimes it's a sex symbol, sometimes it's Marilyn Monroe, it's Kim Kardashian, sometimes it's other not directly sexualized images of women, but in any case still sex symbols. These are these larger patterns that I can perceive in culture and in history. And I think this fits, Hegel, the philosopher Hegel, German philosopher in the 1800s, was looking at these patterns in society, and he talked about the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, which is, it's kind of a squishy idea, and it's hard to get a handle on it, but I think you can see what he's getting at here in relation to these symbolic persons. And Hegel was thinking, for example, about the spirit of freedom, and that freedom was developing in each age, not in a perfect progression, but that it was progressing, that there was more and more enfranchisement, first of men, then of women, eventually, and of poor people who didn't have property. There's freedom is itself kind of on this kind of arc of history, and I think that's true, and I think that applies here. Let's talk about Lord Goring. Now, Lord Goring is the character who's the best friend of Sir Robert Chiltern in this play, An Ideal Husband. And Lord Goring is this well-dressed philosopher. He's meticulously dressed. He changes clothing 4 times a day. He's got the right cane, matches his tie and hat and so forth. Cape. I think we need to bring back capes, personally. And he has this iconic quality as in architecture. Thinking about the Parthenon for the Athenians, this building at the center of their city, and everyone can see it, and it's got this incredible beauty. Or the Triumphal Arch of Hadrian in Rome, which has the added political value because it's showing the power of this emperor and like the peoples that he has conquered, including the Israelites, and you can see them carrying the menorah out of Israel on this triumphal arch. So these are like iconic symbols of power. So those are buildings, but then this happens in persons as well. Or thinking about the World Trade Center, like, why did those terrorists want to destroy the World Trade Center? And you could even just think about that name, World Trade Center. Like, we're going to take out the center of world trade. And that had an incredible impact, a very negative impact, not to mention all the lives that were lost. But they were going after that symbolic power. So then, this is kind of a jarring switch, but now let's switch back to Lord Goring, this man of fashion. And here's the description of Lord Goring in the play. Enter Lord Goring in evening dress with a buttonhole flower. He is wearing a silk hat, an Inverness cape, white gloved. He carries a Louis XVI cane. His are all the delicate fopperies of fashion. And an evening dress means a tuxedo, so generally all black, maybe with some like silver trim or white trim, but basically all black. And so he's dressed perfectly, conspicuously consuming. So this is also drawing us into consumer culture. Like, part of the symbolic value of Lord Goring is showing off his wealth and showing off his taste. And like a peacock, think about a peacock for a second. Like, why is a peacock so powerful? Because he's got this huge, showy tail, and he loves showing it off. He's a proud peacock. And it's completely useless in terms of like flying. It's just a pure show of his power, that he's able to cultivate this extra appendage that's cumbersome, but that's why it's such a powerful image, and it's an image of power. So here's Lord Goring in that proud peacock mode. Mrs. Cheveley also kind of in her mode. Mabel Chiltern. So Mabel Chiltern is going to be the love interest of Lord Goring. He's going to propose to her. Sorry to ruin the story for you. At the end of the play. And she also stands in symbolic relation to her age. And let's think about that for a second. So you have religious figures standing in symbolic relation to their age. The Buddha, who had his amazing life, giving away all his wealth, being with the poor, doing meditation, showing how he was going to live his highly meditative life, and attracting people to that. And then what? People made tons and tons of images of Buddha, little statues, paintings, all over the place. And those proliferated. So this is how a symbolic person can produce art, by inspiring others to kind of create those images. And Nietzsche would analyze these religious founders, like founders of religions like Moses or Jesus or Buddha, Lao Tzu, Muhammad, as doing something similar, that they embodied this culture that they were making and became an icon, became a symbol of that culture. They stood in symbolic relation to their age. And then there's, like, at a slightly lower level, people who didn't necessarily found a religion, but who had powerful lives, like Mary of Nazareth. Think about all the paintings and sculptures of Mary, the mother of Jesus, or Charlemagne in France, or Henry V in England, or Gandhi in India, or Rosa Parks in the United States. That woman who, didn't know that she was going to become this incredibly important person and set off an incredibly huge change in culture and history by not moving to the back of the bus in that Montgomery bus in 1955. But the zeitgeist, the pattern of history was building to that moment, and she was there. She was the person who became the symbol of this movement, of this zeitgeist, and changed things. And so getting back to An Ideal Husband. So here's the play, Ideal Husband. We've got these high society women talking about this culture. You've got another play. I'm sorry, I'm jumping back and forth between plays, but there's another play called A Woman of No Importance. And it's very confusing because these plays are very similar. But there's another man of fashion called Lord Illingworth. And if you think about it, Lord Illingworth, his name sounds a lot like Chillingworth, which is the name of the bad guy in The Scarlet Letter, the novel by Nathaniel Hawthorne. So he's kind of like him. He's a bad guy. But he's like Lord Goring. He's like this man of fashion. And he's going to say that there's nothing is serious but passion. So reversing the usually think, oh, what's important is reason, but passions or emotions, they change, they're not that important. No, he's saying, no, that's what's important, the passions, the superficial. And he talks about the philosophy of the superficial. He says that we should not try to understand women. A woman is a picture, a man is a problem. And okay, I know that he's kind of painting with stereotypical sexist ideas here, but let's read them generously in the direction of this divide between the right hemisphere, left hemisphere, the Dionysian and the Apollonian, and that he's going towards that Nietzschean Dionysian, the passionate, the unconscious, the mythic, the symbolic thought aspect of things. And so yeah, so he's that's where his philosophy is taking him. And this takes me to my song. And let's see if I can do this. Okay, technology, don't let me down now. I've got it on my other screen here. Over here. And so I've got dueling computers, and if I'm lucky, this will work. Okay, and so this is from Billy Joel, and some of you know Billy Joel. Maybe I can sit over here a little bit, push this back, and how Billy Joel sings this song, Always a Woman, She's Always a Woman. And scroll here. She can kill with a smile, she can wound with her eyes, she can ruin your faith with her casual lies, and she only reveals what she wants you to see. She hides like a child, but she's always a woman to me. She can lead you to love, she can take you or leave you. She can ask for the truth, but she'll never believe you. And she'll take what you give her as long as it's free. She steals like a thief, but she's always a woman to me. Oh, she takes care of herself. She can wait if she wants. She's ahead of her time. and she never gives out, and she never gives in. She just changes her mind. She'll promise you more than the Garden of Eden, and she'll carelessly cut you and laugh while you're bleeding. But she brings out the best and the worst you can be. Blame it all on yourself, but she's always a woman to me. I'm going to skip to the end here. She's frequently kind and she's suddenly cruel. She can do as she pleases, she's nobody's fool. But she can't be convicted, she's earned her degree. And the most she will do is throw shadows at you, but she's always woman to me. Sorry. C minor. Something like that. So what I'm analyzing there is the way Joel, Billy Joel that is talking about the woman of fashion. Obviously it's just any woman that he seems to be in love with. But look at how he describes her. And we're talking about how Mrs. Cheveley, the woman of fashion, was talking about how women must be adored, not analyzed. Women inspire awe and wonder and get us to the unconscious, to the Dionysian aspect of society and culture and the person. And she can kill with a smile. She can wound with her eyes. She can ruin your faith with her casual lies. And she only reveals what she wants you to see. She hides like a child, but she's always... And so forth. So, like, she's got... The woman of fashion has this capacity to get at that deeper aspect, the unconscious aspect of the person. She takes care of herself. Yeah. And she'll promise you more than the Garden of Eden. And there's a kind of religious image there, like, that's that inspiration of awe, of wonder that the beautiful person can inspire. She'll carelessly cut you and laugh while you're bleeding, but she brings out the best and the worst you can be. So she inspires the best of you. Blame it all on yourself, because she's always a woman to me. And so this is the way that the woman of fashion, the well-dressed philosopher, works. The consumer artist, the commodified art worker. And so I'm looking at my time. Let's go a little bit longer, and I'll end with some more thoughts here from the play, An Ideal Husband, and let me just kind of rehearse the play a little bit further. So you have a couple of plot lines. You have Sir Robert being blackmailed by Mrs. Cheveley because she's got this secret that he made his money in an illegal fashion when he was just starting out his career, and he needed that money to get his career going. So she's blackmailing him now. In the end, she's not going to blackmail him because of Lord Goring. So Lord Goring comes in and helps the man who seems to be just a dandy who doesn't really seem to do anything. He's actually the most active. He's like the hero of the story. He comes in and assists his friend Sir Robert and protects him from the clutches of Mrs. Cheveley. and Lord Goring is in a romantic relationship with Mabel Chiltern, which is Sir Robert's sister. So, and she's a woman of fashion, like Mrs. Cheveley. But she's the good guy. I mean, she's not, Mrs. Cheveley is the bad guy in the story. And so here's a description of Mabel Chiltern, the good woman of fashion in this story. She's a perfect example of the English type of prettiness, the apple blossom type. She has all the fragrance and freedom of a flower. There is a ripple after ripple of sunlight in her hair. She has the fascinating tyranny of youth and the astonishing courage of innocence. To sane people, she is not reminiscent of any work of art, but she is really like a Tanagra statuette and would be rather annoyed if she were told so. So she's this type, she's like this archetype of the age. She's the sex symbol of that age, of the English prettiness, the apple blossom type, whatever that means. And he's talking about the sunlight in her hair and the courage of innocence. And so this is a great description of this type of woman. To sane people, she is not reminiscent of any work of art. And you're like, okay, that's to sane people, but what about to insane people? And that's the point, is like, she drives people insane. I mean, she has this capacity, like Billy Joel's woman, to kind of like get to the unconscious and inspire you to your best or to your worst. And this is the type of woman she is. This public image, this cultivated, stylized image. Part of it's eros, part of it's desire, part of it's sexual, but part of it's not that. Part of it's just like culture and beauty and a desire for cultivated excellence. And part of it's just being a human face. And I want to connect this with another philosopher, and I'm going to have to think about this one, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Emmanuel Levinas, who was this, I was going to say French, he's actually from Lithuania, a Jewish philosopher who fled the Holocaust to France, ended up writing in French, was one of the big influences on Jacques Derrida. In fact, I would say that Derrida got his best stuff from Levinas, and a lot of Derrida's other stuff was not as good. In any case, Levinas was a phenomenologist of the face, and he had this concept that like the looking at a face, at a human face, like the eyes and the skin between the eyes and the nose, like something about that face opens up to transcendence, and it's the beginning of philosophy. It's first philosophy. And anyway, this is not what Wilde is doing necessarily, but there's an aspect that's connected to Levinas, or that we can connect, that I'm connecting to Levinas, where it's about contemplating the human face, and that there's a certain philosophy, there's a kind of beginning of philosophy that comes from that. And that's what we're seeing in this description of Mabel Chiltern and the description of Lord Goring, including the fashion, like the face in terms of like, a whole body really, and the clothing and the dress and the style. Here's the description of Mrs. Cheveley from that play. Wilde likes to get these long descriptions of the characters, which you don't see on the stage, you see it when you're reading the play. So Mrs. Cheveley, lips very thin and highly colored, a line of scarlet on a pallid face. She is in heliotrope with diamonds. She looks rather like an orchid and makes great demands on one's curiosity. In all her movements, she is extremely graceful, a work of art on the whole, but showing the influence of too many schools. So he's describing her as a work of art. That, like, this is a woman, this is a symbolic woman. She's in heliotrope, which means purple, with diamonds, which is a sign of power and wealth, and makes great demands on one's curiosity. So, like, she's got style. So you're like, she gets you curious. Like, I want to know more about this woman. So she's got this style that draws that in, that gets at the unconscious, that pulls at that part of us. Movements graceful. So, like, she's a dancer. She's able to, like, perform on a stage, but with the influence of too many schools. She's trying too hard. So a real work of art doesn't need to work that hard, but she's kind of trying too hard. And so that's the description of her. Now, let's get the description of Sir Robert. And this is significant, again, to the right and left hemisphere issue about this culture of yin and yang, right and left hemisphere, Dionysian and Apollonian culture. And Sir Robert, the way Wilde describes him, Sir Robert has this big separation between the intellect and the passion, between reason and emotion. And that's the source of his problem. So here it is. Allergies. He says, a nervous temperament with a tired look. The firmly chiseled mouth and chin contrast strikingly with the romantic expression in the deep-set eyes. The variance is suggestive of an almost complete separation of passion and intellect, as though thought and emotion were each isolated in its own sphere through some violence of willpower. But Van Dyck would have liked to have painted his head. This violent willpower, wrenching his emotion from his reason, his passion from his intellect. And this is what, Sir Robert, he had committed this crime, and that's a result of this, that he hasn't been able to marry and connect his passions with his intellect and keep them integrated into this one unified person. And again, I think that's Wilde getting at this divide in the person and in the culture between, I keep saying it, the yin and the yang, the right hemisphere, the big picture images, versus the left hemisphere, the empirical details, logical, hard and fast rules. And that Wilde wants us to open up ourselves and our culture, especially to the right hemisphere, to that aspect that delves into the unconscious, that adduces and accesses those parts of our personalities and our being that are in the unconscious, that are in our deepest desires, and which ultimately tell us our identities. Like, what my deepest desires are tell me who I am, and enable me to build myself into a mature human being who can thrive. And so that's today's discussion.